Yeah.
Everyone, as you come in, feel free to put where you're tuning in from the chat. If you're tuning in from a school, feel free to put that in. I'll try to do a couple shout outs if I see some. My name is Kate, and I'm the Education Program Manager at Sierra Club BC. I'm currently tuning in from the unceded territory of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh people, also known as Vancouver, BC. Oh, shout out Royal Elementary, grade 3-4. Hello. St. James School in Vernon. We've also got some homeschool in here. Very nice. McNeely Elementary. Hellings Elementary. Some from Abbotsford, grade 6. We've got a lot of homeschool. Very nice.
This is actually a spin-off of why we started these how to draw webinars in the first place. During the pandemic, a lot of kids were at home, and so had the idea that, well, it'd be really nice to do something that reach out to them with art and science and conservation. So
yeah. I also see some familiar faces. Kevin Lysing, yes. W.D. Ferris, Oceanside Homeschool. We have some people tuning in from Haida Gwaii. I wonder where the farthest person tuning in from is.
Yeah, we've had people from across the ocean, from up in Europe as well, actually, before.
Yeah, we've had some people from the Netherlands before. Forest Grove, grade 4-5, very nice. Well, as people start to trickle in, I'll do a little intro. I'm very excited for this Learn to Draw All About Lynx. I'm going to be monitoring the chat, bringing some questions forward to Alissa and Julius today. But I am so excited to introduce Alissa Anderson. She is a non-game wildlife technician for Montana Fish, Wildlife, and Parks. She's worked for a variety of agencies, studying many different wildlife, but conducted her research for her graduate school on lynx. And I'm personally very excited for her to tell us about how soft lynx are. I'm also delighted to introduce our returning drawing scientist, Julius Csotonyi. He is a scientific illustrator and natural history fine artist, and one of my good friends. As always, we're delighted to have both of them here today to talk about the elusive being that is the lynx. So without further ado, I will hand it over to both of them to talk a little bit about the beings we are drawing today.
Thank you so much, Kate, for that wonderful introduction. Alissa, it's so wonderful that you're able to join us today too. Thank you. We're looking forward to seeing all of the wonderful the things you show us and the stories that you have for us about lynx. I am joining actually from a city called Edmonton. It's on the territory of the Niheya, Niitsitapi, the Métis, the Dene, the Haudenosaunee, and the Anishinaabe, and lands that are now part of Treaties 6, 7, and 8, and homeland of the Métis. So I am really honored always to be joining you to have these wonderful webinars where we talk about the art and the science, the conservation and the history of all these beautiful beings with which we share this amazing earth. Alissa, would you like to say a few words?
Sure, I'm glad to be here. This is a cool series. Sometimes people ask me to do these sorts of things and I'm like, oh, it's kind of boring. But drawing, like, I love the merging of art and science. Anyways, I'm down in Montana, so probably not as far as from some of you guys. Canada's so large, but it's great to be here.
It's wonderful to have you here. This is Tycho, my little buddy, and he's actually the closest analogy I have to lynx for very, very soft from what I hear. I've never felt it myself, but Tycho is a nice little stand-in for me to have as a sort of little prop there. So with that, I'm gonna put you down here. I'm gonna get started, and give you a preview of who we're dealing with today. So I'm going to share my screen, and I want to hit the more button, not the leave button. Good. Okay, so shortly you should see the screen centered on the drawing that we're going to be preparing today. This is a kind of a preview of what we're going to be doing. And as a natural history illustrator or artist, I like to not just do those little, sort of standard side view of animals kind of thing, but I like to have a little bit more dynamic imagery. And so I've set up this lynx in a run. And, it might be just, heading somewhere, or it might be getting ready to pounce on a snowshoe hare. This future is open. And we're going to be drawing this central large animal actually here. And we'll be talking about the really interesting aspects of this being, how they live, how they hunt, and all of the really neat features of their anatomy, their soft fur, their enormous paws that are like snowshoes that allow them to walk on soft snow without sinking in. Just really fascinating stuff. And I've added a couple of little drawings on the side here. We're not going to do those, but they're meant to kind of illustrate aspects of the lynx's body shape, how their back legs are kind of a little bit longer than the front leg. They're long-legged in general, as well as we're going to talk about some of the interesting ecology. Ecology is part of my background scientifically, so this always kind of gets me geeked out to see how populations of animals change with respect to each other, in response to each other, and the lynx and snowshoe hare have a really interesting relationship that we'll talk about as we go through here. Okay, so let me start in then, and we'll just kind of go back and forth, and we'll chat about the lynx as we go. But I'm going to take off this initial rough draft, and I'm actually going to start up another little thing here that's going to guide us along. And so,
Well, while you're doing this, Julius, we actually have our first question. And that question is, what is the difference between a lynx and a bobcat?
Alissa?
It's a great question. Yes. Well, generally speaking, because they're easily confused, bobcats are more generalist species. So they range, all the way down into the desert, hot climates as well as colder climate places. They can kind of live everywhere, sort of like a coyote a little bit. They can be in urban areas. Lynx are highly adapted and specialists in the boreal forest. So more northern latitudes of North America, and they really specialize in the deep, powdery, cold snow environments. So in the winter, they can outcompete everybody else for their main prey, snowshoe hare, because they have those super huge feet, like Julius already mentioned, that are really heavily furred. They're like snowshoes. And they're actually somewhat, can be kind of similar in weight, but it's just this that the lynx have those really long legs. They kind of look a lot bigger and different. But the most important, there's a lot of things they have, kind of differences. Like lynx have bigger ear tufts, although bobcats still might have ear tufts. The most important feature is the tail. So bobcat have a longer tail that I kind of like to think about. It's like your fingernail is painted, so there's just black on the very top and it's white underneath, whereas lynx I like to think it's shorter, but it's like a pen dipped in ink, so it's actually black all the way around the bottom. So here's a lynx tail, and it's typically much shorter.
That's really nice, and really, really soft fur, right? And long fur too, right?
Yeah, so I do have an educational pelt here. Super soft. It's like, I wish I could send little samples through the internet, but yeah, especially in the winter, it's much longer. They do get a shorter, kind of more brown coat in the summer, but in the winter it's grayer. It's like a chinchilla or something. I don't know if you've ever pet a chinchilla, but just incredibly soft fur with kind of lots of different colors. It's kind of, there's a thicker browner fur underneath, and then they have a little, you know, black and then ending in white kind of grizzled tips that you don't really see from far away, but up close, there's a lot of actual color variation that results in a pretty over mostly grayish fur color.
They're like softest thing you can imagine, right? Basically.
Yeah.
And actually, it's really neat when you point out the color patterns, how they change. There's actually 4 species in the genus Lynx in the world. The Eurasian lynx, the Iberian lynx, the bobcat, as Alissa mentioned, and the Canada lynx, which is what we are dealing with today. And they all look pretty similar, but I think the most differences are between maybe the bobcat and the Canada lynx. If you look at the spectrum, and you pointed out some of those differences actually. So we're dealing with a really, I think it's the fluffiest of them, if I'm not mistaken, from what I've seen. The other ones, the Iberian and Eurasian ones, don't get quite as fluffy, right?
Yeah, the Iberian wouldn't because it lives at warmer climates. I don't know about the Eurasian. It also lives at colder climates, but
Okay, maybe different.
never seen one.
Interesting. Okay, well, let's get started with drawing the Canada lynx. So what we're going to do is you can use, if you're using regular paper, I mean, you can do this digitally too, like I am, but if you're using regular 8.5 by 11-inch letter size paper, just pay attention to where on the page you're putting the lines. I've set up my screen, the one you're looking at here, as an 8.5 by 11-inch page size. And there's going to be 2 things happening here. I'll do 2 kinds of lines, sort of light lines and then heavier lines. The heavy lines are our final lines, kind of to make our drawing have that boldness. The light lines ahead of time are just to guide our pencils to make the shapes about right. And I'm going to encode the light lines by making them red. You don't have to make them red. Just bear in mind, if you see red lines on mine, that means just keep it light. And then the black lines are the heavier final lines. Okay. So what we're going to do is start with some light lines, because we're making this lynx kind of not just from the side, but sort of at an angle coming at us, more dynamic, right? But that means we have to kind of pay attention to proportions carefully as well, because it's got this really neat face with the eyes both pointing forward. It's got binocular vision, which is really helpful for it for hunting. It can judge distances really well, because that's important, as when it hunts these snowshoe hares, as Alissa was saying, it needs to be very precise in leaping after them to minimize the amount of energy that it needs to chase after them, right? So you get it right the first time, you spend less energy, and that's important in the winter, for example, or in times when snowshoe hare populations are low and you need to hunt more carefully. So here we go. So we're going to look at this animal sort of coming at us. And what I'm going to do here is start we'll make this upside down teardrop shape, okay? And this is light lines, okay? So we're going to do this. You start around, let's say, just left of center, a little bit further left. I guess more left. The more left you go, the better, because you'll have more room for the rest of the animal. So we'll make this sort of teardrop shape that's upside down. This is just going to guide us for the shape of the animal's head. One of the things, the reason why it's sort of a teardrop like this is because whereas the top is kind of flat, the forehead, the lynx has these really neat, this ruff of fur on the sides of its face, like mutton chops that come down, and they make these sharp points that hang down underneath its chin. It's just the neatest kind of thing. So that's kind of what we're getting at there. Okay? Also, it's got these really neat ears that come up with tufts on the tips of its ears, these little black tufts, as Alissa was saying. So we're going to draw another bit of like a U shape that touches the top of this upside down teardrop shape. And it'll go something like this. What we're doing here is outlining the edge of the ears so that we know where to put them when we put the final lines in. Okay. So now we got this really weird shape here. It doesn't look anything like a lynx, but bear with me. Look at that. Okay. The next thing we want to do, and this is important when we're looking at an animal like a lynx or other animals that have like a bit of a flatter face, where we put the eyes is really important, right? So I'm hoping that I can freeze here. I'm not seeing move. Oh, hang on, I think it's catching up. Okay, good. Sometimes the connection can do funny things, I guess. Okay, anyway, we're gonna put lines to show where the eyes are going to be to help us guide, because one of the things that we as artists have a hard time with, some of the hardest I have, is where to place eyes on a being's face. And sometimes we can put guidelines in place to help us do that. So first we're going to make this vertical line up and down from along the middle of this teardrop shape, right? From the top, middle, sorry, should be a straight line from the top all the, oh, I am just not really good today, am I? Okay. From there all the way down to the tip of the bottom of this teardrop shape. And again, these are just the light lines we're doing. This is very, very guiding kind of lines, all right? And then the last line we're going to do to help orient where we're going to put the eyes is the slight arc-shaped line, starting at the widest points of that teardrop shape. And it's going to arc upward ever so slightly, just a little bit. And it'll go like this. And it'll cross through the middle and ends at pretty much close to the widest points, or maybe slightly above the widest points of that. So now we have an idea. This will give us a map of where to put some of the features of the face. That'll help us. One last guide we're going to put here for the head is going to help us with the snout, because the eyes are one thing, you know, important to know where to put them, but also the snout, because the way that it's turning its head, it's not straight in the middle. It's a little bit off to the side, because if I turn my head slightly, you can see that my nose is not right in the middle of my face as you see it on the image. That's the same thing is happening here with the lynx. So we're going to make this funny little curvy line that'll start along the left side of that little arc line we just did. It'll come down like this and make this wonky little curve and then come across like that and then there. I don't even know how to describe that, so I just didn't even try. It's just kind of, I use words like wonky and wiggly and things like that because it is the best of it. So there we go. So that's not our finished lynx, right? And then there's one more guide we're going to do, and this will help us to determine the size of the body after the head. And then we're getting, I promise we'll get into the actual final lines after this. This last one is going to be kind of like a big oval, slightly angled a little bit downward to the right, but it will start at the top of that teardrop shape, go way out to the side, and then end up at the bottom tip of that teardrop shape. Go like this. And what we're doing here is we're outlining about how far the body of the lynx will go. Oops, okay, we go like this. Sticks up the top there. But this is going to give us sort of just a map again, where the body is going to be. And then we'll add all the details to it after this. So this looks like some kind of a weird wonky cave painting now, but we're going to go beyond that. So the first thing, now we're going to switch to the heavier lines. All right, so I'm going to switch colors as well. And then you'll see how this is easier to see what's going on. The first thing we're going to put on this animal is the very, very front end of it. Okay, we're going to start from the front. We're not going to go all the way to the back that way, but we're going to start with the nose. That little wet nose tip that you have on cats, if you have a cat or a dog. We're going to do the nose pad. So the nose pad, we're going to situate it inside of that last curve, no, the second last curve we did around where the snout is. And I'm actually going to zoom in a little bit here. Now we know how these various bits are shaped. Now I can show you parts of it. And here's what's going to happen. We're going to draw this, oops, wrong color. Go. Ha. Digitally, I can do the undo. It's just not always easy. We're going to do the nose pad, which is kind of, you know what? It's shaped a little bit like the Superman symbol on Superman's outfit. It's got this kind of upside down triangle kind of shape, and then it's got these are the nostrils that are indentations on each side. You can actually darken those up. That's where it inhales air, right? And at the very bottom of this nose, you also see a little bit of a furrow down the center of the nose. It's just a lightish kind of a line that kind of comes up a little bit like that. Of course, anybody who's had cats will recognize these shapes because the nose pad of lynx is pretty similar to that of our domestic cats. Slight differences, but pretty similar.
We've got a couple questions about the drawing. One is how far back should the curve of the body go? So how big is the body compared to the head? And then is there any reference photos?
Okay, you know what? Yeah, I don't have a reference photo for this one because this is I kind of came up with from looking at many different photos. So, um, I actually for the pose, I actually looked at other cat species for this kind of a run, and then I modified that based on the length of the legs and so on. So unfortunately, I don't have a good reference photo for this, but the curve that we drew for the back of the body. So if you're looking at the image now, you see the full size of the letter size page, and you can see that that curve goes about maybe about as far to the right as to the edge of the page as the edge of the head is on the left side. So it's like a little more than the middle third of the page is taken up by the animal. And you can see that larger curve, if you counted the head, it's about twice the width of the head, maybe. Does that give you sort of an idea? Okay, so that's for reference. That's how big we should leave for this on the page. And,
Julius?
oh, sorry, was there a question there?
No, I said thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. Sorry, I only heard the last bit of it there. Okay, so there we go. So I'm going to zoom in a little bit further on the head again so we can get some more detail. Okay. And Alissa, is the nose pad of the lynx also kind of wet like cats are cold? I wonder because I don't think most people have managed to touch the nose pad of a cat. I know this because I like my doggy Tycho. He pokes at my leg all the time, so I can feel his little cold wet nose when he wants treats. But I wonder.
That's a great question. I have handled live lynx as for a research study to put GPS collars on them, and that doesn't stand out. But
I can probably avoid touching the nose mouth area if you can of a wild.
no, you look at the teeth to try and age them, and you have to check to make sure they're still breathing, everything is fine. But it's funny, I feel like I don't think of cat noises as being as wet as dog noses typically. I mean, certainly they can be, but
Interesting.
yeah.
Different, right? That's true. Yeah, I have more experience with dogs more recently, I guess. So yeah, that's not something that yeah. Anyway, well, thank you. Okay, well, that one stands out as something maybe needing to be found out later. So okay, so there's our nose pad. Now we're going to start with the eyes, and so we were setting up the location of the eyes carefully. So now we're going to actually put them in place. So the eyes of the lynx, the first one, its left eye. It's convenient where we set up those cross pieces because they cross right on the pupil, that dark spot in the middle of the eye, the hole in the iris where the light passes through to go on to the retina. So it's actually going to be shaped a little bit like a lemon, the whole eye. So it's just slightly above that cross where the lines cross, like a lemon or a sideways teardrop shape. And the pupil is not okay. So I guess lynx pupils they narrow into slits, right? As the animal is in brighter light, they narrow into slits rather than ours, which go and stay circular, right?
So they're just like your house cat. Yeah, really similar, but they definitely will change in different light or intensity of how close they're looking at something.
That makes sense. So when they're hunting, I remember I was seeing cats do like on like the Puss in Boots kind of view of the giant pupil. They look at you and these are like totally baleful eyes, adorable. They wrench your heart out of your chest. And then when it's bright light, they narrow into slits. And so what we're doing here is we're showing a lynx with sort of in between levels of light, and so it's got sort of vertical oval shaped eyes because the iris, the pupil is sort of narrow but not fully. So it's a little bit like a vertical line like that. And there's also this sort of dark area that comes in front of the eyes. It's more a patch of skin, and it's also where you often find like the tears will kind of drain a little bit. So there's a dark area, and you can kind of shade it in a little bit. And one of the neat things that makes them look intense is that the the iris, the muscle of the eye, the colored part of the eye that we see in our eyes, is backset a little bit from the cornea, which is the surface of the eye. And so because of that, it gets shaded by the eyebrows, basically, or the outer fur of the animal. And so you get this kind of a shadow on the eye, on the top part of the iris as it intersects the pupil. And so we're going to actually put a little bit of that shadow there. So I'm going to shade, not fully black maybe, but shade that top part. And I'm using single, like, parallel lines to shade. This is called hatching in art. And so it makes it darker, but not maybe fully black. You can fill it in if you want, but it gives it that sort of intenseness because the sunlight coming above it, it only hits part of the eye, part of the iris there. So it's kind of really neat. When you look it up close, it's really neat. And then we have the other eye on the other side, and that's going to go right at that corner where that curvy line was that we set up. And you notice that the eyes are not, the one on the right eye is not quite as wide or long as the left eye, because the head curves a little bit. So we're seeing this eye at a slightly different angle. Okay? So it actually looks a little bit less wide than the animal's left eye, which is on our right side on this image. But the pupil will be the same shape here because the pupil is on a flat surface, the iris, and it doesn't curve the same way that the outer surface, the contours of the eye do. And again, here we have that shading onto the iris, the color part of the eye around the pupil, of the sun being, hitting part of the fur above the eye and having a shadow cast onto the iris. So there's our eye. And actually you can give it a pretty thick black line around the eye because they have these beautiful black eyelids and pretty thick. So don't worry about overdoing the thickness of those, the contours of the eye. So there we got our eyes in place. So it's very important that we have it in the right place. We've set that up. And now we have the proportions right. It makes a huge difference in our work.
One kind of interesting fact about lynx eyes is when they're adults, they're kind of like a mustardy kind of yellow, but when they're kittens, they're this like periwinkle blue color, and they just, really stand out against their fur when they're kittens. It's very cute, of course.
A lot of cats do that, don't they? I've noticed many cat species, the domestic ones as well as tigers and mountain lions and so on, all seem to have these beautiful bright blue eyes as kittens, and then they change in color, right?
Yeah, and I don't actually, this is fun. There's so many questions about everything. I don't know why that is. It's interesting to learn.
It's also true that in human babies, the baby's eyes are often blue when they're newborn. I'm not sure. I heard that, but I could be wrong about that. So I don't want to spread misinformation. But it's interesting that blue in several species of animals happens to be the beginning color of eyes, and that we also have many people among our population who, as adults, retain blue colors. It's really fascinating how that's actually changed. All mutations and so on, and the history of species is really fascinating, I think. Anyway, yeah, I just totally geek out about this stuff. So next, we're going to move on to the mouth. And this is the business end of the animal. And we've already set up that snout sort of light outline. Now we're going to embellish it a little bit further. So the mouth of the animal, the very tip of the mouth, there's going to be this little crevice that comes down from the bottom of the nose. And this is what you see if you have a cat, you also see this kind of thing. There's a little line that comes straight down from the nose, and then it splits and widens out to this really wonderfully squishy little snout part, these whisker holding bits. This is very sensitive parts of a cat's face. A lot of nerves in there. It's the whiskers come out of these follicles in this part of the snout, and so there are tons of nerve endings, so that they can use their whiskers to sense very, very tiny changes in texture, in motion of things. Anything that touches the whiskers is transmitted as information, tactile touch information, to their face, and the nerves pick that up there. And they can learn a lot about their environment. That's why cats have such long whiskers. It's basically their feelers. They're like antennae on insects. They allow them to feel their environment in dark conditions. And then we have these tiny little light lines come up, barely lines, dotted lines, maybe even from the edges of the nose a little bit upward, little indentations more. Basically, we're looking at the contour of the face. And then, of course, they've got these neat little black markings that come down on their chin that pretty much line up with their canines, those like fang-like teeth. And so we're going to make these sort of darker fur areas coming down. They're not teeth. These aren't teeth. These are just like color changes on the chin. We'll put the chin in a moment, but they come down. These are very visible on the lynx. And now we're just going to put the chin right under there to give it that shape. They have a pretty big chin, really massive. They have powerful jaws, and very fluffy too. So of course the chin looks even bigger in this case. So we're putting the chin underneath the snout. This goes back about that far. And now we're starting to recognize the face of this animal, right? What's really neat I found in my reading is that lynx have very sensitive canines, or those four large fang-like teeth that carnivores have. So they are able to feel where they're biting their prey really effectively. They've got to be really good at doing that because they don't want to spend a lot of energy in hunting. And so to be able to dispatch their prey quickly, they need to know where they're grabbing. And so they have very sensitive teeth, lots of nerve endings in those teeth.
We have another question that's, how would their olfactory receptors differ from dogs or humans on the snow?
How would their on snow, like?
It says, how would their olfactory receptors differ from dogs, humans on the snow? I'm wondering if this person can type in the chat a clarification, but you can answer generally if you know how they're different.
I guess compared to dogs, humans or bears, or I think they're a little bit less scent oriented than, dogs and bears are very scent oriented. Humans, they're more like humans, I guess, in the sense that they're more visually oriented. So they're visual predators. Well, they certainly can smell and they can use their nose. They're, very visual as far as looking for prey.
It's interesting when you think about it. You look at animals that use their snout a lot or their nose a lot for detecting prey. A lot of them have quite a long snout, and there's a lot of room for air to interact with the surface and to be picked up by the receptors. And of course, cats don't have quite as long a snout, and I'm not entirely sure if there is a correlation there, how closely related it is. But it also makes sense that their eyes, as you were saying, they're visual predators, and their eyes are placed in such a way, kind of like ours, where both eyes can have the same image. And so you have an overlap of the image on both eyes, and the brain constructs this three-dimensional impression of their environment from the binocular vision, as it's called. And so they're able to generate a really good idea of how far away prey is from them, for example. So how far they need to leap, for example, how much they need to speed up to catch prey, for example. These are all really, really helpful for a visual predator, and you can see how both eyes are visible forward. Lynx, really, really effective hunting. So now we're also going to add the whiskers. We were just talking about the whiskers. And so the whiskers come off from these little dark spots. This is where the follicles are, the bases of these hairs. Whiskers are really just really super long and super thick hairs, regular fur, that has a special function because of the enormous number of nerve endings at the bases of them that register how the whisker causes the tissues under it to flex as it interacts with something in its environment. And so the whiskers come out of these dark spots, lines of dark spots. Yeah. This one's broken. And yeah, they do break. And they do sometimes shed whiskers. You ever found your cat's whiskers? Sometimes they'll fall out and there's this big giant whisker laying on the ground and so on. So you can see the difference between a whisker. Whiskers are known as vibrissae, if we're talking sort of biologically. They're a special kind of a fur. They're thicker. And so they don't bend as much as regular fur would because they want that information to transmit all along the length of it to the base, to the follicle, so that the nerve endings can receive that information about how much it is being pushed by something, its environment. And so we've got the whiskers in place now. The next thing we're going to do is going to go up to the top of the head and do the ears. We've set up those guidelines for the ears, and now we're actually going to put them in place. And the ears are these beautiful little triangular things. The first one we're going to do is the one on the animal's left, which is on our right side of the image. And the line we drew on top is the upper edge of the ear, basically. So we're going to go, and the ear is triangular, but a little bit curved. And especially toward the outside, it's curved. But there's also this extra little bit. If you ever look closely at a cat's ears, there's like this extra little lobe that comes off at the base that's much thinner skin. And so that's what we're looking at here. The top of the ear is just visible here. And then you can do a dotted line to join the top, sort of the upper part of the ear and the leading edge of the open part. And then, as Alissa was saying, they've got these wonderful long tufts to the ears, and they're black. So there's a bunch of fur that sticks up at the very tip of the ear and makes the ear longer. Alissa, what's the function of these tufts?
Another great question. You know, the males do have much longer tufts than the females, especially the mature males. So I don't know that it actually funnels sound or anything like that, or keeps the ears warm or anything like that. I think it's probably just kind of an identifying feature. You know, a lot of different animals have stripes or spots or different, you know, kind of features that maybe they're used for camouflage, but maybe they're used for more communication. As far as for mating purposes, or, you know, assessing each other, or potentially for communication. I don't know, you know, maybe when their ears move, they can looking at each other or something. But yeah,
It's interesting. Yeah, this is a good example of, now, I mean, there may well be research that's been done to try to figure out the function, but I don't actually know myself. But it's a good illustration also that not every feature of life forms is known to have a particular purpose. Not necessarily because it doesn't, maybe it does, but we haven't figured it all out yet. That's what's exciting about science. We are actively asking questions all the time. Sometimes the answers we get seem right at first, but upon looking at it closer or for longer, we see that, oh, well, this seemed like a reasonable answer, but there's actually even a better answer. So this is how science works. We're always asking questions. We're always trying to figure out how the natural world works, and we get to it in stages. And it's about, you know, the I don't know is kind of the first the spurring of the interest in continuing research along some direction to answer these questions. And those of us who have done research or are actively doing research, we get very excited about it. I don't knows. And it stimulates us to try to answer these questions. So yeah, so thank you. And this is a thing. And maybe one of your viewers actually knows this answer. Maybe they're a kind of function like whiskers to increase the sensitivity at the top of the head. Who knows? Somebody probably does or has a good idea of it. I've just added the second ear as well. One of the things you notice is that on this ear, it's twisted a little bit away from us. And of course, cats have very mobile ears. You've seen them move like little radar dishes, and independently of each other even. And this one, we can see more of the upper part, the outside part of the ear, or the auricle as it's called, this outside ear structure at the top of the ear. And you can see also it has that black tuft at the end. So now our ears are in place. We have most of the facial features of this lynx now. Okay. And now we just want to put the margin of the head in place so we know about what it looks like. And this is where we encounter those wonderful long furs along the side, those mutton chops, as they're called. Mutton chops are the name for a particular kind of I think a very unusual mustache style that was popular many decades ago. And so some animals, though, and maybe animals inspired this, they have these interesting bits of fur that come out down the side of their face. And so cats, as you probably know, have these really wide ruffs of fur on their side of their cheeks, basically, or behind their cheeks. You can actually make this line that we're going down from the animal's left ear or on the right side kind of fuzzy, because it's a very fluffy part of the animal. And then you go down further, almost to the very tip of that upside down teardrop shape, which was the very first thing that we drew. Because these lines were the guidelines to allow us to know how far to make these super long mutton chops of this lynx. like that. And then it's sharp pointed at the bottom. Actually, the Iberian lynx has incredibly sharp mutton chops from the photos I've seen of it, even more so than the Canada lynx. The Canada lynx, though, has big fluffy ones, really wide ones. You know, they come down.
Kind of like,
yeah,
kind of like the ear tufts. It's the older, more mature males will also have bigger ruff than younger males or females.
interesting. So yeah, it could be about showing, you know, sort of genetic competence or something, or you know, competitive ability, or just sort of like an advertisement of look at me, I am all that. I don't know. One of the neat thing is that sometimes these sizes of different portions of the body can make a difference when it comes to competition. So I don't know if you've ever seen videos of what are called stalked-eyed flies, but they're really neat animals. They have their eyes are on the ends of long stalks, so they look like hammerhead sharks, kind of. And they're the weirdest things. And so the length of these eyes will determine how successful they are with each other. The males will come and face each other, and they'll have these little dances where they compare the length of their stalk, their eye stalks. And the male with the wider eye stalks basically wins. The other one just kind of walks away. So sometimes lengths of some of these structures on the head, for example, are very useful to help decide which animal gets to keep a territory, for example, things like that. It's interesting how nature works that way. And yeah, maybe mutton chops are similar in lynx, but I don't know. But it's interesting that you say that there are differences in the lengths of these depending on age and you know, other kinds of features as well. So that's our animal's facial features. You'll notice that the cheek on the animal's right side is not exactly following that guideline, but kind of indents slightly near the eye. And then you get this wider cheek. Just I'll call attention to that. But now we have the lynx's face. And at this point, we move on to the rest of the body. And as we do, we can also talk about some really neat things. For example, as Alissa had mentioned, the legs of the animal are very long compared to some other cats. And lynx legs are, in fact, very, very long. They are really useful for really rapid running to capture super fast moving prey, which are the snowshoe hares. They specialize on snowshoe hares. They can explode into high speed chases. They don't want to chase too long, so they are also ambush predators. They wait and hide until snowshoe hare are near, but they also run after them, so they need these long legs to run. So that little image in the lower left-hand corner is like that. But we're going to put in some of these legs actually now. We're going to put the body outline afterwards, but we're going to start with the left front leg. And it's actually bounding, right? So its legs are kind of partly bent. And so this is the shape that we have for this leg here, coming out from near the center of that that bigger red guideline, or the light guideline that we put for the body. And then at the very end, we have these huge paws. And you can actually put slight bulges for 5 fingers at the elbow. If you look closely, I'll zoom in here. You can see there's this little indentations, these locations between the fingers. So the fur mostly covers that space in between, but there's slight differences where the fingers kind of meet each other. And then, of course, the other leg, that other front leg. So because this animal is bounding forward, neither of these front legs is actually in contact with the ground. They are both in the air as it leaps forward for whatever reason it's doing that. And so we're actually seeing both of them just kind of, well, either from the top, like the one we just drew was from the top, if I held my knuckle like this. This next one we're going to do is kind of slightly from the side, actually from the inside, so we'll actually sort of see where the thumb is. You start at that lower right mutton chop, and we're going to draw a line that comes down. It's kind of like a very kind of a bent long U shape. Get back up here, and this one ends at near the tip of the other paw because it's behind it, right? So it's the right side, and it's partly hidden by the paw, the left paw, which is in front. Also, we can draw a little bit of the outline of some of these fingers, like the thumb and the first finger. Now, from here, it's really hard to see. I'll put in a little bit of the fur at the bottom, and there are these toe pads and the palm pad, and these ones are like you see in your cats. There's the open skin. It's not fur covered, but only for a bit. Now, actually, Alissa, how much of that bottom is covered in fur, or is it all covered in fur? Am I completely wrong about this? I know bobcats are like they have some pads, but do lynx the pads of lynx show up at all when you look at them underneath? Because you've handled them.
Yeah, and so I mean, in the winter, it might be a little bit less so in the summer, but if you just hold up their paw, you actually all you'll see is fur.
Wow.
And it's kind of amazing. That's one thing too. Like if you're a tracker, if you look at tracks in the snow, you know, like in a mountain lion, a track in the snow, you'll see the toes, or a bobcat, whereas the lynx, it's just kind of this like sort of fluffy, and you might see the outlines of the toes for sure, but it's kind of blurred. You know, it looks like someone took a feather and kind of blurred the edges. And so you actually have to like to find the toe pads, because they do, of course, they do have exposed toe pads just like any other cat, but you have to kind of like peel back the fur, you know, to see it. They're pretty amazing.
And this is neat because that fur gives the bulk that allows them, like connects all of these tissues so that they can sit on top of soft snow without sinking into it. Coyotes also chase snowshoe hares, but their legs actually sink into the snow often. Snowshoe hare, Canada lynx are able to basically like glide on top of the snow much more effectively because of these massive, fluffy paws. That's really cool, actually. So don't draw the toe pads. If we want to make this especially stand out for lynx, we're going to make it just fluffy. Right? So a little bit easier there. It's one stage less. So that's really cool.
I do love this angle of the feet, though. I feel like it really accentuates just how ridiculously big and fluffy and sort of silly they are, almost in comparison to the rest of their body. It's just it's crazy. But yeah, it's what makes them such a specialist species, like you were saying.
And I've seen, people's hands next to these paws, and I'm like, wow, they're just huge, like dinner plates almost.
For like a 20-pound animal, that's not
right?
very...
Especially when you think of that.
It's kind of cool. I still remember the first time I ever saw lynx tracks in the snow. It was really exciting, and it was cold in Montana, and so it was pretty fluffy snow, and I think I was wearing snowshoes even and still sinking up almost to my knees, and then the lynx tracks were sinking down, I don't know, maybe an inch or maybe two. I mean, they do weigh a lot less than me, but it's just amazing. They're so good at what they do.
And see, that really illustrates nicely the point that what's more important than the absolute weight of an animal is how the weight is distributed over how large an area of contact with the surface. So if you have an animal that's 20 pounds but is the size of a baseball, it'll fall right through. But if you have an animal that's 20 pounds and is spread out over these huge paws, it can ride on the surface without sinking in because the pressure per any unit of that area is much lower. That's what counts. And that's what they're accomplishing. And so I'm adding the thigh on the animal's left side back there, these two little round shapes of the back. Basically, it's kind of its rump. And then below that, we're going to add the leg. These are the long legs. The back legs are longer than the front legs in lynx. And so that little drawing on the left side, the lower left side, shows how their back slopes a little bit forward because their front legs are a little shorter than their back legs. This is really great for an animal that wants to run really fast. Those back legs are really effective for pushing off. The longer they are, the more propulsion they can add to the animal, the longer they can push them forward. And so this is kind of like kangaroos are really great at hopping really fast. They've got these super long hind legs. And it's not that lynx hop like kangaroos, but these long legs are able to push them off further with each stride. So really effective for hunting as well.
Especially for hunting snowshoe hare. One really cool, I saw this picture exists on the internet if you can Google it, but some museum somewhere has a display of a snowshoe hare skeleton next to, leaping, next to a lynx skeleton also leaping. And if you just look at the skeleton, they actually have really similar, they both have those super long legs. And so again, that kind of just shows how the coevolution and how much the lynx is specialized in hunting that one prey item.
Yeah, matching its ability, basically, right? Physiologically, and the engineering sort of looks similar, for lack of a better term. It's really interesting when you point that out. So again, the back paws are also ridiculously big. And I've put in some of these lines for the toes, but they don't need to be really that sharp. There's not a lot. As Alissa was saying, that fur really hides the place where the toes meet. So just put tiny, tiny little bits of hints of where the toes would meet. Then, of course, the animal's back here, it doesn't quite follow the guideline that we did. The guideline was really just a guideline, and now we're going to draw in the actual line of the animal's back as it's sort of arching, as it's leaping, and it's a little away from that line like that. So, and of course, you can see where the shoulders are, that bump above the arms, and as the animal is leaping forward, those shoulders get pulled up. That's why there's more of a bump then. And the belly pretty much follows the bottom of that line that we did, the guideline. This, you can barely see that, they're only there. And then, of course, there's one more leg. And this leg, the right hind leg of Lynx, is now actually kind of pointing backward. It's already pushed off with this, so it's just beginning. It's kind of leap, run. It's probably more galloping than anything else, I guess. So you can see the knee underneath where the other leg joins, and then the heel behind it curves sharply there, and you can sort of see the toes and the paw. And this paw you can see slightly from the side and slightly from above, because we're seeing it pushing backward, and we're seeing it effectively from the top of its paw. Very kind of a dynamic way of looking at this animal. We have two views here too, one standing and one running, so kind of we can compare the shape of the body and how it changes with different kinds of stances. And of course, the tail that Alissa was saying, it's a very short little tail. If you look at your cat's tails, unless they're either cropped or injured or Manx, which have effectively almost no tail, most cat's tails are very, very long. Some of them are incredibly long. And then, of course, the lynx has a very short, fluffy tail. Yes. Sticks out the back a little bit. Okay, and then of course we can also add some of the contours for the body shape. The fur, as the animal's body stretches, sometimes the fur separates into clumps, and there's these little like furrows or valleys in the fur that show the way in which it's stretching. So some places, like at the base of the back legs where it joins the body, you have these little lines, and of course, you might have a few. These are like dotted lines that we can put in here, because these aren't really hard, sharp lines. Basically, we're just trying to show how the irregularities in the surface of the fur show up, and actually help us to determine or to convey the shape of the animal's body, because it's space-filling, wide, fluffy kind of, especially during the winter. But they don't have a lot of mass, as Alissa was saying. They're actually quite light animals. It's almost all fur you're looking at. And so, yeah, so there's going to be a lot of fur patterns. I love to see the way that fur changes in patterns as it bends, as the skin under it bends, and different piles of fur kind of separate from each other and join up. You get really neat patterns that show up. So there we go. This is just some examples of it. The other thing that we can add is lynx, compared to other species of lynx, or sorry, Canada lynx specifically, have relatively few markings. They are really great at hanging out on snow. You don't want a lot of sharp markings, because that'll make you stand out. As a predator, you want to hide from your prey, so you want to blend in with the environment. So you want sort of more blurred markings if your environment is relatively uniform, like snow or even dirty snow or patches of stuff on it. So lynx do have very, very faint spots on their legs. I'm just going to add little fur lines to indicate where some of these spots are, but they're not very strongly visible. Bobcats are really beautifully patterned with lots of quite much more visible spots, and they have a much redder color fur in many parts. They are more of a, I believe bobcats are a little bit, they hunt in typically less snowy environments typically, right? A little bit more vegetation, I'm guessing.
Yeah, they typically, there are places where they overlap in range with lynx, but more so at the southern extent of their range, you know, in the less snowy, less intense winter climates. Yeah, so they're, you know, they can live in snow too, but the lynx can outcompete them in that really deep snow.
And so now we have our animal drawn. The thing that we want to mention here too is that we've been talking about throughout how it hunts snowshoe hares, the specialist mostly on snowshoe hares. It's a large proportion of their diet. What's really neat is that when you track the populations of lynx and snowshoe hares, we have over time this cycling that happens. And we know this because there are populations that have been recorded as a result of, let's say, from measurements of the number of lynx that have been caught all the way back into the 1700s by the Hudson's Bay Company. And so now we have really good numbers or tracking of their numbers. And it looks like about every 10 years, roughly 8 to 11 or so years, you have a peak in the population and then a drop and then a peak and a drop. And the reason this is happening is because they follow the population of snowshoe hares so closely. They're so specialized on them that they will reproduce a lot if there's a lot of snowshoe hares. They can produce a lot of cubs, and then their numbers increase. And then now there's lots of snowshoe hares being hunted by lots of lynx. And then that causes snowshoe hare populations to crash. And as a result, once those many lynx run out of a good food supply, the lynx populations will start to decrease as well. And they will follow. One population follows that of the other. And if you look closely at this kind of little, this is actually drawn from actual data. The populations of the two, the lynx populations are slightly displaced, a little bit following that of the hare. So the hare populations peak first, and then the lynx populations afterwards, and then the hare populations drop, and then the lynx populations drop, and it goes in cycles. And so it's actually really interesting, these predator-prey population cycles that we see in some species. Lynx and hare are a very famous one, and sort of it results from interactions between them. And yeah, so I find that fascinating to see these examples of a really well-defined interaction that a lot of us have learned in ecology classes when we took them in university. We have these, they're easily modeled mathematically, actually, even the Lotka-Volterra population equations that define these things. And these actually work quite well to show how these cycles work in nature.
As we start to approach the 2 o'clock, I'm going to have Julius put his final touches on the lynx. I'll stay a little bit after to answer any lingering questions as best I can, but I did want to say a huge thank you for everyone who is joining today. It warms my heart to see so many people care about these really large cats, and we would love for you to share your drawings with us. So please email them to us to be featured on the website. And if you or a younger learner in your life would like to learn more about Lynx, we have a worksheet that you can print out with some creative activities to help you learn a little bit more beyond today's session. Our next Learn to Draw is going to be in September, so in the next school year. It's on September 18th, and it's going to be all about the small but mighty sandpiper. So I just want to say my final thank yous. And I hope everyone had a good time today. Anything else from you, Julius or Alissa?
Alissa, I was going to ask you if you could say some words on what are the threats that lynx, face today, and what can we do, or how can we help them? What are the major threats that are facing them?
Yeah, and again, I'm in Montana, so I'm at the very southern extent of their range, which is, going to be more peripheral, less perfect, less ideal, less habitat, lower snowshoe hare densities. And so here we're already kind of on the fringe. And so climate change is the biggest threat to lynx here, being that they need that deep, powdery, cold snow to outcompete other species. Whereas threats in other parts of the range might be different. it's possible that their habitat might grow in the northern territories as trees advance further onto the tundra. But you know, they're not really eaten by other animals a whole lot. You know, there is definitely sustainable trapping in a lot of places where there's a lot of lynx, and that's not necessarily, you know, a threat. I mean, we manage all that stuff, and I think climate change is probably the biggest one. Certain in some areas, you know, deforestation could be an issue. I'm not aware of, I don't know as much about the northern habitat, and if I don't think that's, you know, a huge threat right now, but yeah.
And I think in the south, from what I remember, I think habitat fragmentation was a big one. I mean, they used to have a range further south, but now there's been a lot more habitat fragmentation in the States than in Canada because more of the land is occupied by us, right?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, that's kind of true for anything. There's actually been a lot of research, at least in this part of the world, looking at how forestry can proactively help, because, you know, also with mega fires, you know, they actually do really well about 20 to 40 years after a fire, when they have really dense lodgepole pines grow back up after a fire, and that's a lot of great food and hiding cover for snowshoe hares. There's often a lot of prey. But kind of with mega fires, you know, the worry is that all the habitat will burn. There won't be that refugia habitat and a mosaic of habitat for them to keep going. So there's actually been a lot of research on how using forestry could actually help prevent mega fires and could actually help create a great mosaic for lynx habitat. Of course, making that happen on the landscape is easier said than done, but yeah, so there are forestry things, you know, fire type stuff that we can do as well.
That makes a lot of sense. And of course, it's very important for us to, as much as we can, interact with our elected representatives to encourage them to push forward legislation that you know allows for some of these practices to take place, for regulations that are effective that way. That's something that we've seen a lot actually be quite helpful in many of our causes. And so this is why I think I always encourage us to do whatever we can to reach out to, in Canada, our members of parliament and legislative assembly, and in the States to various state representatives and federal as well, to do what we can to encourage, to show our elected representatives that we care, that there are many of us who care. And it most definitely makes a difference. I've seen it happen many times. And I strongly encourage us all to do it. We can even use, you know, drawings like this to put into letters to show that these are some of the beings that we care about. So there's always hope. I always push for that. We live in a time when we face a lot of despair, and anything we can do to reduce that despair is useful, because there is every reason to know that we can make a big difference. Never give in to the idea that we are beyond hope. That is absolutely not true. But we do need to act. And so everything we can do. So get out there, enjoy wildlife, enjoy the outdoors, do whatever you can to refuel yourself, draw, right? Everything. We need that kind of, you know, psychological energy boosts. These are helpful for us. So with that, I thank you, Alissa, for joining us. Thank you, Kate, and everybody for running this wonderful set of webinars. And that's it from my side there. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, I think that's concluding our time together. Thank you again for joining us, both of you. And thank you for drawing along with us. I really want to see everyone's drawings at the end of this. I'll show mine really quickly to send us off, if anyone can see this.
Drawings for a gallery.
Hold on. My guy has a sad face a little bit.
Well, they can move their.
See it?
Oh, look at that. Excellent. That shows the paws really nicely, really big paws. This is great. And are we going to have like a little gallery where people can send in their images and they can, yeah, that would be awesome, because I love seeing those when people do that.
Awesome. Well, thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Alissa. That was wonderful to have you. That was really, really neat information as well that you shared.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Can't wait to see all the drawings.
Indeed.